And now, because they're here almost every year, please welcome Hart Hodges and James McCafferty from Western Washington University's Center for Economics and Business Research. Anything going on this year? Take it away.
Hard, I don't even know where we start. Do you have a good idea where we start?
No, Dell was too positive.
Yeah.
No, we pulled into the ferry terminal and where are you going? Why are you going there? James had the
Audacity.
whatever to say we're going to give a talk on economics. And he said, why don't you just make something up? No one will know. It's too crazy.
And I said, did you already see our show?
All right. So I stole the title, The Fog of Uncertainty, from a friend who used to be the president of National Association of Business Economists, and it plays off of some of what Dell was saying for sure. And the guy at the ferry terminal was not wrong, but we're not going to make stuff up. But I think one point is we do want to talk about what we...
They won't know the difference, Hart.
We want to talk about things that we can speak to with some confidence. So more on that in a minute. I'm going to start with a very strange slide, and I'm sorry it's hard to read, but I think it's important. It's the projections for what's the economy doing this quarter, Q1 of 2025, and next quarter.
And we're talking GDP here when we talk about...
All GDP.
We're not talking about Joe's economy.
So you'll notice on the left portion of the slide, the dots are all right around 2% or a little higher, and the expectation, late last fall, early in the winter, was growth this quarter was going to be 2-point-something%, and then you can see in the far right it just drops to about 1%.
And 2% is about what we want, right?
Well, 2% is close to a long-term trend, so that's fine. But the drop is due to the uncertainty that Dell was talking about, and people are just sort of seizing up due to all the uncertainty. And on the right, it's also showing what do we think is going to be happening next quarter, and the red diamond is the S&P Global Insights overall average, and so the forecast for the economy is dropping, and we're not going to get very specific in terms of decimal places and numbers with our forecast. We want to talk about what you should watch and some of the key metrics.
And this is different than our Federal Reserve friends in Atlanta, who are forecasting a negative number.
Well, the GDP Now model, as it's called, that the Fed in Atlanta has, they actually run two versions of it. One is about minus 1.8, so a contraction happening right now. But they run a different version of it that uses the price of gold, oddly enough, and it gets all the way up to 0.2.
Ooh.
So
plus or minus 3%? No, I'm kidding.
Perhaps. So this slide is from a Bloomberg article recently, and the color is talking about tariffs. The colors are tariffs that have been enacted, tariffs that have been removed, tariffs that are promised or threatened. And I think a takeaway message, without getting into all of the detail, is that each one of the tariffs that's either been enacted or threatened, the expectation is that it adds to inflation a little bit, not dramatically, and slows economic activity. Whether we get all of the promised...
Well, ironically, the GDP that's being affected by all this is ours. The global GDP is barely getting nudged. So this is affecting our GDP. Other places in the world are actually doing quite well because of this.
I don't know about the quite well,
Well,
but anyway.
better.
All right, so one of the things that we do know something about and can track, the blue line is the yield on 10-year treasuries.
Which are important, right? Because that's what closer tracks to mortgage rates.
Well, I would have said the other way around. 30-year mortgage rates and other mortgage rates are very highly correlated with the 10-year treasuries.
Unlike the Fed rate, which everyone gets excited about, which doesn't. Okay.
The green dots are the yield on 2-year treasuries. And if you lend money to somebody for 2 years, you're going to get a certain interest rate back. If you lend it to them for 10 years, you'd expect to get a higher rate, right? You're tying up your money for a longer period of time. So on the left part of the graph, you can see that the green dots are below the blue line, and that's what you tend to expect. That gray bar in the middle is a recession. So that one happens to be the COVID recession. When you look out to the right, two things should stand out to you. The yields are the same on the 10-year and the 2-year. That's a little bit odd and worrisome if you want to get into it. But the main point is it's up around 4%. And the growth we had, a lot of the growth we had last year was all predicated on, in 2024 and into 25, the Federal Reserve is going to lower interest rates. Interest rates are going to come back down quickly. Inflation is going to fall. Life is going to be great. So we can go ahead and spend money. Well, the interest rates haven't come down.
And probably aren't.
And if they don't, economic growth is going to be slower.
So this gets into a really interesting conversation point, because someone in a large white building in DC would really like to get mortgage rates low. Really think that's really important. And so we, the people, are trying to depress the 10-year Treasury rate to make that happen. So I know you all didn't come for a true economics class, but if the blue line goes lower, that's problematic, right? At a very large scale. And so we are doing some very interesting things that you can pay attention to in the media around how we're trying to get the Treasury rate low.
Right. And I think one thing to watch, again, the fog of uncertainty. What's going to happen with policies? What's going to be the response internationally? U.S. debt. If other countries start losing a little bit of confidence in the U.S. or getting frustrated with the U.S. and aren't as eager to buy U.S. bonds, then that'll put upward pressure on interest rates in the U.S. that could be problematic. So thinking longer term, not a short-term forecast. I'm going to say a couple times, keep an eye on the 10-year Treasury, just as an indicator for what's happening. And I think, James, part of what you're saying is it could go down because of weakness, it could go down because of lower inflation, but it could go up because of debt problems or inflation problems. And that's that fog of uncertainty. We're concerned about inflation being sticky, keeping the 10-year Treasury yields up. We're concerned about sort of a lack of confidence or lack of demand for U.S. And concerns about the debt, also pushing the 10-year Treasuries up. One of the things we said last year that you should really keep an eye on was consumer spending. And we said, what happens if consumer spending slows? And I apologize. I've asked that question in 2022, 2023, 2024, and now 2025. We keep wondering, when is consumer spending going to slow?
Let's ask these guys, when are you going to stop shopping?
Tomorrow is a different answer.
Actually, we're starting to see that in data. We're starting to see some significant cutbacks in households, but it's not as evident in the data as you can see from these squiggles.
So what this graph is trying to show, the yellow line at the top is consumer spending by people in the top 10% of the income spectrum.
Give me an idea, Hart, how much do I have to bring into my household to be in the top 10%?
I think for this particular article, it was over 250,000.
Okay.
That's who's shopping, and that's who's keeping the metrics in terms of overall retail sales, consumer debt, and other things for somebody to be able to say, the American consumer is doing well. You have to unpack it. It's actually the top 10% that are doing well.
But maybe not so much when they get their 401k statements in a couple
Wow,
weeks.
that's another story. And I think one of the things to think about when we're going to try to unpack that question, when might the consumer slow down and what might that mean? On the left are different metrics of consumer sentiment, especially at the top, consumer confidence, and how is your personal situation.
Hart, these don't look good to me.
Well, the one on the bottom right doesn't it? Oh, wait.
That goes up. No, that's inflation. Never mind.
That's inflation expectation. So what we're seeing, and it's back to that first slide, with GDP slowing is you're starting to see for the first time in several years the consumer saying, I am uncertain, I may not spend as much, I'm going to sit tight. And then on the right-hand side of the graphic is retail sales back to a long-term average, but remember, supported only by the top 10%.
Also, keep in mind that the cost of goods are going up. And so I don't know if this one is adjusted or not.
I don't, so he's saying adjusted for inflation, right?
Correct.
As prices go up, you can get more spending even if people are buying the same or less.
I just saw some data earlier this week that actually showed that a lot of the increase in retail sales has been increase in pricing. As you all have experienced.
Okay, so what we're trying to say is the consumer has been the economic driver.
But only the top
we'll-
10%.
We'll talk about that with the labor market in just a second. And there is some worry that if the consumer is starting to slow down, the economy will really slow down.
We're
One of
really
the
cheering this audience up, Hart. This is good. I like
Yeah.
where we're going.
So one of the reasons you might worry, on the left, it's stock ownership, but it's also a reflection of a little bit on stock returns. And over the last couple of years, the wealthy have had, even their cash was earning 4 or 5% in the bank. And their stock market, 2024 and 2023, both years, stock market went up 20%.
How are we doing this year?
One of the very few times that's happened in history that you get back to back. So if I'm in that top 10% and I've got the cash, I don't really care that prices are going up as fast as they are because my money is growing faster. I feel fine. I feel flush. I'll buy that Rivian.
So you're saying if the market's not doing so well, maybe that would change my perspective?
So yeah, I'm talking about wealth effects. I feel wealthier. I'm going to spend. I'm more confident. The graph on the right is a little bit wonky. Sorry. When you think about stocks, you often want to ask, well, if I'm going to buy a share of Apple, how much is the company earning? So I want to compare the price of the stock to the earnings from the company. So that PE, price to earnings ratio. And the graph on the right is showing that it's a little bit dated because it was at the end of the year. We'll update this at the end of March. But you can see the price to earnings ratio in the S&P 500 was in some pretty rare territory. Only times we have been the same was .com and COVID. That's how pricey stocks got. Everything was running up. So it's come down a little bit, but it's still in the highly overvalued category. If the stock market keeps coming down, that's a wealth effect that'll affect consumer spending. So will the prices, so will the confidence, that uncertainty. So if you're looking at what does unemployment look like, what does consumer spending look like, what does GDP look like, all of the numbers to date look good. And we're just saying be careful as you look behind those numbers.
Hart, we started talking about during COVID that there was a lot of people that couldn't go gambling. They couldn't, there was no sports and things. And so they started playing in the market because that was like gambling. That's still happening, right? People are still doing that?
Not as much. Sport gambling is back, but yes, there's still a fair bit of.
And then we have the poly markets, right? We can go bet on, is Hart going to wear brown shoes today or black shoes today? We can bet on this stuff. It's great. So that could be part of this.
Part of the run-up in the market, part
Yeah.
of the speculation? Yes, but it can also be part of the reason for the wind down, which can be a little bit concerning. So, overall, we're looking at GDP growth slowing, and we think slowing to below 2% this year, with a risk of more. Slowing inflation, but probably not getting to the Fed's 2% target until 2027. Is some of the best guess.
And if we cut if somehow someone gets Powell in a back room and convinces him that we should cut rates, what would that do to inflation?
Well, if the Fed cuts rates, it'll probably be because the economy is slowing. And then the inflation is probably going to be driven more by tariffs and other policies. So the Fed's going to be stuck. And we're slowly starting to talk about stagflation, where you've got inflation a little bit above what the Fed wants, probably closer to 2.5%, 3%, with a slower economy.
Well, and these people are a little bit misled a little bit because they're told tariffs don't cause inflation. So tariffs are a one-time price adjustment, right? So you get a spike and then it levels back off. That's how they make the argument that it's not inflation, it's just an adjustment for tariffs.
All right. Avoiding that. So, labor market. Again, a little bit busy. We had to put 2 pictures on each slide because Joe said we could only have 15 or 20 minutes, so we had to cut the slides in half, but that's easy, right? Just put 2 pictures on each slide. So, on the left, initial claims for unemployment, still low. Again, most of the metrics for the labor market say things are good.
Unemployment's low overall.
And we'll show it for Kitsap in just a second. But continuing claims, people staying out of the labor market, younger people having trouble getting into the labor market. And there's a lot of ripple effects. The federal layoffs won't have a profound effect on the unemployment rate because just there's not that many federal workers. But in terms of what does it mean for people trying to get into the labor market, well, my funding was cut, my PhD program was cut, I'm looking for this job, that job. It ripples down. There's a lot of stagnation in the labor market. But keep an eye on unemployment insurance claims.
And remember, if you have someone who just graduated from college and they haven't found their job yet, they're not in these statistics because they weren't in the labor force to begin with.
Well,
So-
if they start looking, if
Right.
they start looking and filing for unemployment and that sort of, but it's hard.
Right.
So also want to unpack the labor market a little bit because we can say 4.8% is the most recent number we get for Kitsap.
And again, 5% would be
We
supposedly
used to
the
think
good spot.
5% being close to a normal rate of unemployment. So Janet Yellen, a couple of years ago, when we were all predicting recession sometime late 2023, early 2024, that was the recession we were cheated out of. The consumer kept spending. She said you can't have a recession with unemployment below 5%, right? Because that was an old benchmark. But there's more going on when we start looking at what's happening in the labor market in the Puget Sound area. From 2000, you can pick your starting point, 2010, 2015, pick your year, up through 2020, the industry sectors that were growing the fastest were information and professional technical services. From 2020, late 2021 or beginning of 2022 to present, the sectors that have grown the fastest are leisure and hospitality, accommodations and food service, and a little bit on the healthcare side. In some counties, it's government, but the switch has really been from information and professional technical services to leisure and hospitality.
So you're saying unemployment has stayed low.
Yep.
We've lost jobs in high wage, but gained jobs in lower wage. I follow that?
You valid it.
Okay.
Now, it's a little bit different here in Kitsap. So this graphic is going to be hard to read. The blue at the top.
Suddenly they were hoping spaghetti was on the menu.
So this is just showing, if we just balanced everything from what was it January 2020. What sector is so, the blue at the top is the professional business services, the green is retail, no, the lighter green is retail, the lighter green is government, darker green is retail, and it's a spaghetti, but one of the points that I wanted to make with this is that Kitsap is the outlier, and it's in a good way, in that you've had more growth in professional and technical services and in the information sector than any other county in the Puget Sound region. Now, it's easy to get good percentage growth in something that starts off really small. So there's a little bit of a statistical.
You also have the possibility that people, employers can opt on how they report their employees. So if you have remote workers, for example, in Kitsap, they may have gotten moved from Seattle to Kitsap for reporting purposes. Doubtful, but maybe.
And some relocation of businesses to get out of Seattle. But so it's a good story here, and I want to dig a little bit deeper on the local. And this was a little challenge. So the graph shows percent of total, blue being wages, red being employment. So construction on the far left. About 6% of the jobs in Kitsap are in the construction sector. and about 5.5% of the wages earned in Kitsap County are in the construction sector. And then as you come through retail, 11% of the employment, only 7% of the wages, right? So I'm trying to show how big is a sector relative to others, but also how important in terms of some of the wages. And government stands out for a lot of reasons. K-12 is in government. Tribal is in government. Some of the military, not all, in government. So, I mean, if you go to Whatcom County, we're 17, 18% of the employment's in government as well. It's a mixture of higher ed, K-12.
K-12 is the big winner in most counties.
Tribal as well. But noticing the wages, nearly half the wages in the county come from people in the government sector. So as we think about this uncertainty, what sort of cuts might there be? What sort of I mean either straight layoffs or just different cuts to different programs could be very important. And I mean federal, but also state, right? If you're looking at what's happening with the state budget, and just so pay attention to that as you're thinking about what's the economy likely to be in this area in the next year or so. My depressing slide,
Because the rest were uplifting.
especially sitting at the table, our conversation was. Dell kept asking, what are some of the things that are on your mind? And all of us were saying, oh, housing. So if you think about wages, and I've just grabbed the most up-to-date wages that I could get from Employment Security and the most up-to-date housing prices I could get from the University of Washington. So they don't line up perfectly. They're a couple of quarters off, but it still tells an important story. And that affordability index, what that really means, lower numbers are bad, by the way. If the person if the household with a median income could afford the median home and James, you can help me out, it's still 30% of your income going to housing.
33.3.
The index would be 100. So from there, if the housing prices go up or the income goes down or some combination, the affordability number goes down. And the affordability numbers change quarter to quarter. Whatcom is sometimes lower than King, sometimes a little higher. Kitsap hasn't quite beat King lately, but you're still not where you want to be. And that's not a challenge that's going to go away. We read an article this morning on the FS.
Yeah, the executive orders, trying to keep track, right? So one came out this morning that the federal housing organizations have been told to get rid of the special purpose corporation financing, which are all the tools that first-time homeowners use to purchase a home, give them down payment assistance and all kinds of things. So all those are going to go away.
If the policy holds.
I haven't checked in the last 20 minutes, so it's hard to know.
So no easy solution. I'm only putting this up as a paint the picture. It's going to be a challenge. And the housing problem is not something that housing was fine and completely affordable, and then somebody made a policy mistake and then it wasn't. This has been growing for decades.
So, Hart, I'm watching my clock because Joe's going to get the hook out in a minute. Housing has never been affordable for everyone. No one buys a median home. Nobody earns an average salary, right? So all the things we talk about, none of those are actual things, but it's how we can talk about it. So let's keep the conversation, but always keep that in the back of your mind. None of those things are real.
Well, I think what you're saying is housing. Define it.
Amen.
How big of a house? How many amenities? Where? Seattle has, on national charts, very expensive housing relative to income. But we were talking to some friends, if you put housing and transportation, like where do you live and how far do you have to go to get to work? Cities like Houston and Atlanta start popping up as going from more to less affordable in that sense. Affordable to whom is another angle. So it is a trickier conversation. So he's getting out the hook.
Fly, Hart.
So again, I said 10-year treasuries, keep an eye, because if they stay up the way they are now predicted to stay up, that's going to cause things to slow down.
And if they go down really sharply, it's going to cause a problem.
Well, if they go down really sharply, it's because of a problem. unfortunately. Consumer spending. That bullet and the sub-bullet actually are taken directly from last year's presentation. One of these years, we will be able to stand up here and say, wow, consumer spending actually changed. Government budgets, state level as well. Some of the proposed tax cuts will lead to cuts in areas like Medicaid and Medicare.
Which will affect state budgets.
And so you've got to keep an eye on that. But mainly, you want to forecast, talk to the guy at the ferry terminal, keep an eye on 10-year treasuries and the labor market, especially the jobless claims.
Our quick commercial.
Oh, I hate that.
Hurry.
Thank you.
Hurry.
Just
you.
like
Thank
Del,
you.
we're
Email us,
available.
talk to us,
This
blah, blah,
is-
blah.
This is James.
Follow us on social media. We post 6 to 8 things every day. So we'll keep you in the know. We have a podcast. You can listen to that. And then you can also choose to subscribe to our economic forecast publication, the Puget Sound Economic Forecaster. But thank you for all your fun today.
Give them a hand for the sunshine, Hart and James. Thank you.